Hello and welcome. Today we are going to be talking to you about how we developed Stages, which is the newest DVSO project slash album thing, and I have with me here some of the folks who have been integral in putting that together. So if we could go around and just introduce ourselves, talk about, what you do and how you relate to this project.
I think you should start.
Okay, hi. I'm Andrea Kloehn, and I am the visual artist who designed works to go with each of the pieces that Louie composed for this concert.
Hi, my name is Stringfellow, and I play oboe in the DVSO, and I'm also part of the marketing team.
Hello, I'm Louie. I'm the composer for this project, and I've been working with Jordan and the DVSO for several months now, and it's been a really great experience, so I want to thank them very much for all of this.
Hi, my name is Gunsbury. I'm a flutist and I'm part of the DVSO management team. And I've been with DVSO since the beginning and it's been really fun to watch it evolve. So yeah, I'm excited for this next stage.
Me too! There's so many stages. Can we talk about that?
So many stages.
I've also been here a long time. Okay.
Was that like intentional?
What?
You were saying stages a lot, like with a lot of...
it was.
Oh,
intentional.
okay. You weren't
keep
doing
going,
it with
though.
it like the normal weight.
Right.
So anyway, if you've not already seen Stages, it is on this channel right now. You can go see it, and it will very soon be available on pretty much every music streaming service. So go check that out. But yeah, I'd like to start actually with Louie, and basically just hear from your perspective on how you came to start working with us, just sort of like the inception of that from your perspective.
Yeah, so, I saw your concert Biomes, which was the last concert you did, I believe, around a year ago nearly. And it opened with a really great piece by a composer who's a friend of mine called JJ Berthume. And I thought that it was a really good composition, and not just that, but what drew me to it was the actual performance itself and the overall production value of the performance and the quality of it. And it was just so interesting to see that being done virtually, because all of the other virtual like choirs or orchestras that I dealt with in my limited experience has been quite poor production quality overall, and a lot of it had just been like a bunch of people singing on Zoom together or that kind of stuff, and or just like my crappy editing or something like that. So that was basically my experience with that, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. I need to jump on this boat if this is possible. So I sent an email I was either directly to you, Jordan, or to the DVSO email. I just basically inquired and showed him my music and saw if he wanted to perform it with the orchestra, and he decided that he liked it, and we went ahead with the project. And it took a while to sort my crap out, basically, to get all the parts ready and all that kind of thing. And then once we decided that we were going to perform my symphony, we decided on a couple of other things, because we just thought, why not make it a whole concert rather than just one video. It kind of evolved into an album project, which we've now named Stages, which you will have seen. And we thought, this would be really cool if we got some more things involved here, so that it was it was kind of a multi-artistic project. So that's where we got in touch with Andrea, who's made some amazing pieces of artwork, and then that's where kind of we're at. We've been recording it and it's sounding amazing. We've got Jonathan on the engineering side of things with the sound, and it's going really well so far. So it's been an overall phenomenal experience.
And speaking of the symphony itself, could you tell us like a little bit about that and like what the both musical and non-musical inspirations are that are at play there, and how the symphony sort of realizes those?
So it kind of started off where I basically was just practicing piano and procrastinating from what I was meant to be doing, so I was just improvising, and that's when I just kind of improvised the opening few bars of the symphony, and I just decided that I might turn this into a piano piece. Basically, that was my first thought, because at the time I was quite into writing piano music, and I was scoring a game at the time, and I thought I could use it in this, because the whole soundtrack for that game was piano as well. So I thought this could be good to use for that, and then I kind of just had this intuitive sense that I could turn this into something much bigger than just a piano piece. So that same day when I got home, I started orchestrating it. Just the first sort of, maybe 20 bars or so, kind of sketching it with the orchestra. And then I realized that actually this could be a kind of symphonia or something like that, or a orchestral suite or something like that. So there was also a competition on at the time within my university, and they had all they were basically calling for works so that they could perform them, and it was a competition. So that is actually where the first movement's instrumentation came from. And then the pandemic hit and we couldn't do that anymore. So I just basically stopped working on it. I only did a couple of months on it. And then probably 9 months after that, I started working on my final year project for my university degree, which I thought I might as well do my symphony for this project, basically. I'll just finish it off because I hadn't really done much on it except for the first sort of half of the first movement. So that's when I started bashing out the rest of it, basically. I wanted it to be an abstract piece of music. I didn't want it to be too programmatic or literal. I based it loosely around the significance of events in my life over the past sort of 6 years, and so that was basically what I was writing about. But I again, to emphasize, it was a very abstract idea. It wasn't supposed to be programmatic. So then I essentially just started studying works of modern symphonists and composers. Shostakovich, Malcolm Arnold was a big inspiration, a whole bunch of other composers, and I basically just went from there and eventually finished the composition in around May. And I think it was either then or when I was halfway through the symphony that I sent it to Jordan. I can't remember, and that's kind of how it went on from there, basically.
I think I got the first 3 movements. I particularly really like the first movement. I think that's my favorite of the piece.
Yeah, I remember you coming into my room and you were like, hey, look, I just got this email from this person who wants to be a part of DVSO. Check this out. And we looked at your SoundCloud and it was really awesome. Yeah.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
That's actually a great segue because I wanted to ask both Claire and Grace, who perform with the DVSO, what each of your favorite parts were to record or to not record, just like listening wise.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. I remember hearing the first movement of the symphony and being really drawn to that immediately. But I didn't end up recording that movement. So I think my favorite thing to record is probably the wind quintet, just because it's so short and sweet and just a little adventure. So yeah, I really enjoyed recording that.
Yeah, I feel similarly about the Windmill Quintet. Was really fun because I felt like it brought out a lot of flavors, and I think that a lot of people struggled to write for Windmill Quintet, but everything that was, like, the things that you pulled out of the ensemble really brought light to the fact that it's, like, a veritable ensemble, like a chamber music ensemble. I think a lot of people focus more on, like, string quartets or they'll go crazy, like, write something for a weird instrumentation. And I think that the way that you wrote for the quintet made it feel, like, organic. And so that was definitely my favorite to record as well. And hearing the final master of it, it's just... Oh, it's so fun. It's just so light and fun. And yeah, that sounds great.
Really
That's very kind of you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think everyone who played on that was really into it. I know Dylan, who played horn on it, sent me an email and appreciated a lot of the fun horn writing in that. It gets pretty crazy. But it was fun. It was fun to put that together. I really like doing those like chamber projects because I can do them really fast without setting myself on fire.
And all the textures that you can explore.
Yeah,
it's super fun.
Yeah, I'm also curious for the two of you. You've each played on every single DVSO program. What keeps you coming back?
Yeah, I just I really like the vision of the symphony. I think that it's evolved a little bit over the course of existing from when it first started in the beginning of 2020. But what it's turned into has been really lovely. I feel like everybody who's involved has a say. Obviously, by submitting their recordings, they get to contribute their own artistry and all of that. But along with that, you have always been really open to ideas from anywhere in the ensemble. And being a part of a professional orchestra, I feel like there's not as much of an opportunity to have my individual voice heard in the running of everything. And so the fact that this is so easy for individual performers to contribute ideas and to be a part of this bigger community if they want to, that's nice. Like, you can join the mixers if you feel like it, or you can be just submitting recordings. It's kind of like a customizable experience. And so I think that, in addition to, like, it's really important and vital mission to play music by like lesser performed composers, like, I think that's just super important, and that's what keeps me coming back. It's always interesting, it's always fun.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I've loved, I mean, yeah, like you said, Grace, it's like totally changing, like how DVSO has grown like over the past few years is really exciting, and I'm excited that there's so many possibilities with this kind of a format for an orchestra. And I think it's really fun how you can get the music, record it in your own kind of bubble, hear the MIDI, like you kind of have a sense of how it's going to go, and then like I honestly kind of forget about it for a couple months and then come back and hear the concert, and it's like, oh my gosh, like that's what it's supposed to sound like,
yeah.
You know, and the amount of difference that comes with putting each individual like track in together versus just hearing the MIDI when you're recording it on your own. Like, it's gratifying in a totally different way than it is performing a live concert, in like a really fun way. Even though you don't have the experience of like getting the immediate feedback from musicians right next to you, you have kind of a longer drawn out like process of it, which I think is really cool. So
that's actually funny that you bring that up, because I remember DVSO was like just starting out and I was so disorganized. My process was like, just every time I got a new track from someone, I'd be like, all right, into Logic, and then stare at Logic for like 3 hours while I wait for someone else to send me a track. Now it works a lot more efficiently, but I remember in particular there was a moment in my Symphony, which was our first project, for anyone who doesn't know, in the first movement, where it was you two who I had added into the project, and then I think there were some first violins and maybe a bassoon or something, and it was like exactly what you're describing, Claire. It was like just so like gratifying and insane that sound was able to be made out of like remotely recorded tracks. Like, that was just like crazy. Brings a tear to the eye.
It's amazing just the amount of like humanness in that sound that can transmit even without the live feedback. Like, I think there's just so much we can do in our own little bubbles that when you put it together, it's like,
yeah,
really
and
cool.
it stretches me, I know, to be better, because I know that the microphone is point blank there in front of me, and just thinking about how can I play in a way that someone else could, like it's intuitive. Like, this is going to be something that goes together no matter what, rather than like an individual spin on something. This is something that can be, I don't know, versatile. It's been really a good challenge, I think, as well.
I think people at the beginning, some people I think were really hesitant to like send me their videos because it's just so exposed.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It's so hard, yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because you would think that because of the needing to abide by a click track and having to be, you know, a certain way, that certain expressive things would sort of be extinguished. And sometimes that's true. Like, rubato just can't exist in the DVSO, and you just that's the way it is. Unless it's actually, funny enough, in a completely exposed spot, like the celeste solo in the third movement of Louie, your Symphony, there was a bit of rubato in, and at first I was like, oh wait, we're gonna have to redo this because that can't happen. But then I was like, wait, there's nothing else rhythmic happening here, so this is one of the few moments that we can have something like that shine.
Yeah.
But
I would just say that, you know, I'm obviously still, I haven't been involved with you guys for that long, and very quickly it seemed like there was a real sense of community within the orchestra. Like, everyone seems so friendly, and I mean, I haven't really had much involvement with a lot of the performers, but within the sort of management and like principal bubble, like, it seems like everyone gets along so nicely. There's, you know, complete cooperation with everything that's going on. Everyone's got some ideas. Everyone has the chance to say something valuable and raise their voice and put something forward for as input and feedback and stuff like that. And it's just such a good platform for people who, you know, want that sense of musical community, but otherwise might not be able to get that in the area that they're living in, or perhaps they're not quite at the level yet where they are going to be joining a professional orchestra or something like that, or there's no orchestras in their town. It's just such a good way of bringing a community of musicians together. I that kind of really struck a chord with me when I started joining in with you guys. So, yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
awesome.
we're all friends.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Welcome to our friendship.
that is also one of my favorite parts of this, is that like there's no restriction on who gets to share their ideas or anything like that. Like I mean, even just using this project as an example, I feel like as a composer myself, I would not really be able to like email a group and be like, here's my symphony, you want to do it, or at least I feel like it wouldn't usually like result in something. But I think it's really nice that we're not entrenched in professionalism, I guess. It's like nice that there's much freer communication. One of the most exciting parts of stages that to me is like the most differentiating factor between the previous two has been Andrea, and I would love to hear about your conversations with Louie and how they led you to create the art that you did, which you actually have here, which I didn't expect.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll show up on the
it'll be
screen,
great.
but we can definitely pull it out with lots of crinkling and noises.
You can hold that up to the mic. It's like ASMR.
God, yeah.
Your artistry is in everything you do.
The next DVSO project is ASMR.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me see. Claire reached out to me a few months ago and had seen some of the visual art that I've done and asked if I would be open to taking a commission from DVSO, which sounded like a really fun project. And so we went ahead with it. And it's been a really, really cool experience to be part of this musical event in a non-musical way. I myself am a musician, but do a lot of visual art on the side. So it's been really interesting to see how I can combine those two modes of creative expression in this commission. And as Jordan said, Louie and I have talked a bit about his artwork, and I ended up creating I guess as you've seen if you've watched stages, ended up creating 3 different pieces, each of which goes with the pieces that Louie composed for this concert. And then I also created a triptych that is meant to represent the entirety of this concert.
Wow, it's really crazy to see those like IRL.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so I'll start with the Wind Quintet. Louie and I talked about how the quintet was inspired by his time at, I believe it's called Ashton Court.
Ashton Court, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about that, Louie, and then I can jump in with my interpretation of your inspiration.
Yeah, sure. It's a beautiful sort of nature reserve and manor house and estate with grounds and everything that's just outside the city that I live in, and it's close enough that you can walk there within about half an hour of where I live, maybe less than that, which is really close for, an amazing piece of countryside when you're living in a kind of big, pretty busy city. So yeah, it's super nice to be able to go there. And it's not just like, it's not like if you went to Central Park or something in New York where you're surrounded by city and then it's in the middle. It's like if you just kept going in the same direction past Ashton Court, you'd be in like proper countryside still. So it's really like part of the countryside over there. Lots of farmland past it and stuff like that. And so it's a really nice escape to get away from the city, and you can see the city from Ashton Court because it's very high up as well. It's kind of like on this massive cliff, which is part of this huge, amazing gorge, which is kind of one of the centre pieces of Bristol. And anyway, so it's a really nice escape from the city. So I used to go, well, I still go there quite a lot, but I used to go there even more during university, just trying to get out of all this city lifestyle and have some peace and quiet, and also just to enjoy some walks with my friends and things like that. And we went off there gallivanting and all that kind of stuff. I won't go into too much detail as to what we got up to, but we had a lot of fun there, and there are a lot of kind of meaningful experiences, shall we say, and meditative experiences, both on my own and with my friends, and lots of great times we had there. So basically, I wrote a piece of music based on my times there, and it's just kind of meant to be the kind of music it's supposed to just kind of be a bit of a jaunt, really, just kind of like frolicking around the Ashton Court, I guess, with my mates. So but with a meaningful twist on it as well. So yeah, that's what I told Andrea roughly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something that Louie and I connected a lot over was both of our relationships with nature, because we both discovered that we find a lot of meaning and rejuvenation through spending that time in nature, and also I think creatively take a lot from nature in terms of just the whimsy and I don't know, magic is maybe too cliche of a word, but there is this magic to just being out there in the woods, and that was something I heard a lot in Louie's music and also wanted to convey in the art that I created. So yeah, so this is the artwork I created to go with Ashton Odyssey, and I was really struck by hearing Louie talk about the deer that he encountered at Ashton Court. I think he said there's 2 different types of deer there or something, right, Louie?
Yeah, you have red deer there, which is I think they're like the biggest deer you can get, and they're just unbelievable, and you can get so close to them, it's like unreal. You wouldn't believe how close you can get to them because they're so used to people. So you can literally, stand 5 feet away from them and they'll just be sat there munching the grass looking at you with like not a care in the world. And they're really cute and amazing and majestic. And then there's also another type of deer there, which name escapes me currently, but if I think of it I'll tell you. But they're kind of like, they look a bit more like Bambi in that sense. Like they're much smaller, cuter. They've got white spots.
Those are the fallow deer, right, Louie?
Fallow deer, yes, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah. So for this piece, I took inspiration by just different images of the red deer and fallow deer antlers, and then tried to convey whatever you really want to read into it. Louie and I talked a bit about the process of creation more broadly, and we both were pretty intrigued by the idea of abstraction. I'll talk more about that too with the other pieces, but you can see that in all of the works that I've created for this. This is probably one of the more literal ones.
Which is fitting because the piece is much more literal as well. There's a lot of music in there, which, one of the reasons why I thought the wind quintet was such a fitting body of instruments for this piece was because of the kind of the natural sounds of these instruments. You know what I mean? Like it's kind of stereotypical, but they do have kind of animalistic associations. So it just and there's lots of points in it where I tried literally to make it sound like elements in nature or different animals and stuff like that. So it's fitting that the artwork is also like that compared to the other stuff as well.
Yeah, so talking about the impromptu next, Louie, do you want to go ahead and tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So it was actually for a competition originally that I was just kind of, at the time I was just looking for anything that I could write for to get some sort of promotion and also some money as well, because and the impromptu was based around nature and the city was the theme, and basically I wanted to try and reflect my own kind of feelings about nature and kind of industrialization and humanization in general. So I wanted to write it in 3 movements rather than have one single movement piece. The first movement was a kind of tragic sounding piece. I guess it's kind of just depressing how like a lot of the nature is just gone now that we have like overtaken, I suppose, throughout our quest to rule the world as human beings. But I mean that in a kind of, it's good for humanity that we've been able to succeed in the way we have and popularize the planet in the way we have and have all this great kind of technology and everything. It is still sad that we've lost a lot of the nature that was originally surrounding us. So in the second movement, I then did like a bit of a homage to nature, where I just kind of wanted it to be a nice, pleasant piece of music about how beautiful nature is and things like that. And then in the third movement, I wanted it to be a little bit more hopeful, slightly more abstract as well, where I wanted to just kind of write some music about the themes but in an abstract way, but also I wanted it to represent themes of hope which I have for kind of reuniting with nature at some point. That was something I wanted to write about too. So that's kind of what the piece is about.
Yeah, so I created this piece based off of Louie's and my conversation about a lot of those themes he just mentioned. And I was really inspired by this idea of the human impact that we have on the world and what the organic existence is in the world, and how those two are sometimes at odds but also have these strange overlaps at the same time. And I think that's a big takeaway I got from Louie's and my conversations was that we've seen all this hurt that's come from human industrialization and existence, but there's also this big question as to maybe some of what we've done in the world has been good, and sometimes there are really beautiful things about aspects of humanity that aren't initially so beautiful seeming, if that makes sense. This is getting pretty abstract as well.
No, I get you though. That's actually, you put it a better way than I did anyway.
Yeah. But something I found really intriguing was this idea of lines and interweavings in nature and in human experience. And so what I did here was I took inspiration from the aerial maps of a city grid. So that's what you see on the left side of the picture. And it's obviously much more standardized than the organic side of the picture, but there is a freedom to it and there is a beauty to it. And so that's why we have this organic side on the right half of the drawing, and then we have this city grid merging into it, and they're separate but they are connected and they inform each other, and I guess everything's just ambiguous in that way in the end.
Yeah, but I think that's a good way of putting it though, because you know, it's not as black and white as perhaps I was making it out, and the beauty is not exclusively nature, right? You know, like architecture and all forms of organization that we've done can be very beautiful in some ways. And yeah, I mean, that is another thing that I wanted to kind of, another theme within the piece, and that kind of goes along with why there are a lot of positive, you know, notes, no pun intended, in the piece basically.
I think it's interesting to note, all of you watching at home probably have heard this in Louie's music by this point too, but he is a hopeful person. And I think that's something not insignificant to remember, because a lot of the themes that he's writing about and that we've spoken about are pretty dark and do have a lot of questions about how uplifting is the future. And he's approaching a lot of these really dark topics, but he does maintain that hope. And I think if there's one thing that you take away from this concert, that should be it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of how the symphony ends as well, which we can segue onto with the art as well. You know, like the symphony is incredibly dark at places, but it ends with that massive kind of loud, weird fanfare thing where there's just loads of chaos basically happening, but in a kind of organized way, and then at the end of it, you kind of expect it. I feel like originally I kind of expected it to end in a more triumphant way, but it kind of shifts down. The chord changes key abruptly right at the end, and it's on an open chord. So if any of you listening aren't musicians, it's basically just means there's only two notes in it, and they're as, you know, perfectly placed apart as they can be basically. And that sounds very bare, but also very kind of open-ended and cool, to put it frankly. But yeah, that's the kind of, it was kind of like an uncertain ending, but with a triumph that both, you know, it's okay that we don't know what's happening in the future, so that's why, you know, it's a triumph in itself that we can live in the present moment. And that's kind of the theme of the ending, I suppose, as well as it just being the end of the music, you know. So I just wanted it to kind of go out with a bang.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction, is that you can be a hopeful person and not be a toxically positive person. You know, Louie, as we've been speaking, and you hear that in his music as well, is that there is this fundamental human pull towards, you know, I know things can be better, and I fundamentally think that we can make things better. He's not, you know, coming on like with a nice 5-1 cadence at the end. Everything's fine.
The journey's not ending yet, that's for sure.
You know, and that's something I really appreciate in his music and in his philosophy too, is that he's hopeful, but he allows that uncertainty to say, well, you know, we don't really know what's going to happen. And so it's like a cautious optimism. Anyway, moving on to the symphony. I was really struck by Louie's and my conversation about the creative process and what it means to create in a literal versus an abstract way. And I think the Symphony is probably the most clear example of one of his pieces where he was composing very abstractly. And Louie, something you said when we were speaking that I thought was really enlightening was that you like to compose in an abstract way and then kind of like retroactively go back and use that abstraction to understand what you were thinking.
Yeah, it's kind of like a musical journal, I suppose, because when you're journaling and stuff, quite often you don't necessarily know how what's kind of going on with your life in a kind of episode in your life. You're just writing in the moment what you're thinking about, and then you can look back at that episode, that week or that month, and think, damn, like that was a bad time, or that was a great time, or whatever. And then you can learn quite a lot about yourself and what makes you feel good and what makes you feel bad. Like if you were going to track your progress, for example, in that journal, you could have like a grid of things that you do, and you can check them all off. And in the weeks that you do those things, if they correlate with you feeling better, then you know that they are more likely to make you feel better, and you can learn that retrospectively. So it's kind of like, I feel a similar way through just kind of emotions and feelings and intuition through the music, rather than it being so literal as like a checklist or whatever. But yeah, it's like a retrospective musical journal, I suppose, in a sense, without even knowing about it.
Yeah, so the Symphony, I took a lot of inspiration from this idea of abstraction and ended up creating this piece that has a lot of different components to it, which I think pretty accurately reflects the way that Louie' Symphony is a large-scale, intricate work. So I like the fact that there's no focal point to this, really. You can focus in on a lot of different spots in it, and they're individually interesting, but there's no point where it goes, here's the climax, this is the answer to everything. And I think Louie' Symphony plays as such as well, where, there's lots of really interesting particular moments in his music, but there's no point at which you go, oh yes, this is the answer that this has all been leading toward. And there are some musicians where their music is much more like that, and you can think, oh yeah, like here we are, this is the answer. So I think I created this in a purposely non-hierarchical way because that's how I heard Louie's music. And the image itself was inspired by landforms that I saw from a plane when I was flying over western Nebraska. And I was really struck by the independence of the land in this place, and then how minute the human interaction with that land looked. And so you can see in here, there's all these different really complex, strange landforms, and then we have these lines that are, roughly representative of roads that I'd seen. Pretty minute and tangential to the actual content of what's happening in here. And then we have these entities, beings, that are roughly inspired by windmills that I'd seen from the plane, but they kind of morph and they become their own characters with their own personalities. There's no particular message to this artwork, but there's themes to it, and I would say those themes are, what are we doing on this land? What's our impact? What's naturally there? Again, very similar to a lot of the other themes within Louie's music and within the other artwork. Also the idea of energy. I thought the windmill was a really potent emblem in this, because energy is the crux of what's led us to so much of our environmental destruction, with fossil fuels. And we're now trying to figure out how to live energetically, more consciously. So I think the windmill really represents that core question of, this is what's led us into this climate crisis, and what is energy? Like, just think for a moment about the concept of energy. It's so nebulous and weird, but it contains so much at the same time. I mean, the sound waves are energy that you're putting into this. It's just wild. So I created a triptych of artwork instead of a single piece to represent this album and concert, because I felt like Louie's music is all about the change through time and stages, as it were, rather than a particular, this is what this is all about. And so as each of these three pieces flows from one to the other, I think that really is what encapsulates Louie's message in his music, as I understood it to be. So the first part of this triptych, I titled Auroboros, and This is inspired by this ancient symbol of a snake eating its own tail. And this is a pretty abstract rendition of that. But this stage 1 of the triptych, I think of as being representative of humans before we became an industrialized species. So this is Adam and Eve still in the garden, if you will. And I think of this, before humanity came to conceptualize itself as distinct from nature. That's why I chose this image to be the first phase, is because the snake is eating its own tail, which isn't a particularly happy concept. So then moving on to the second phase of our triptych. And I titled this image to represent the industrialized, Western civilization period of humanity that we're currently still living in. And I think this speaks for itself pretty clearly. We have this graphical representation, like a literal graph, where, it's getting bigger. You can interpret that however you want. And then we see as this graph gets larger, as our time is going forward, we see the area of this becomes larger and larger. And if you look at the actual icons that are within this area, you see our current period of civilization to be all about. So it's not all bad, but it definitely has a lot of dark themes in it with, the nuclear, warning. And so this is our second phase. And I think that a lot of the darkness of Louie's music encapsulates the movement from this first phase into this second phase of the triptych. And then the final piece in this triptych really represents what Louie referred to as whatever comes next, and not really being sure what that is. And this one probably took me the longest to really conceptualize how to convey, because as Louie and I were talking, we were both pretty clear on our feelings that, humans used to be really in the flow with nature, and now we're really not, but we're not really sure exactly what happens next. And we both, I think, are fairly hopeful people, like we talked about earlier, but there is that question of just like, what? We can see what's gone wrong, but what actually would this more beautiful world look like in the future? So this is something of my idea of what maybe that would look like, which is part 3 of the triptych. And I think this is the question that Louie comes to in a lot of his music. Maybe this is my attempt at an answer to that question that he reaches. But I titled this piece Ta-da-ta, which is a Buddhist word for it means something along the lines of suchness, or kind of like the essence of something that doesn't really require words to describe it. This image is actually based off ice crystals that I saw while I was on a walk a few weeks ago. And I think that this concept of just being in and of itself and not really having any motion or direction or anything like that, it is what it is, and it just exists there. I think that was my best attempt at an answer to this question that Louie is asking. And there's not really emotion to it the way there is with the Auroboros, but it just is. And I think the form of it is pretty satisfying, and I can't quite explain why, but it's just there, and it's fine. And
it's really cool to look at as a whole, but also to it was cool to get the scans of these to see how intricate it is, because I didn't see that at first, but then once I got the scans, it's really cool. And so I think the way that this triptych comes together with Louie's music, I felt like it really represented that journey that he goes on and he's thinking a lot about in his composition, of coming from a place of being in line with nature to being really separate and having a lot of pain because of that, and then questioning whatever comes next and trying to attempt an answer at that. But who really knows what that answer is? Yeah. Well, that's a great summary of just this whole project, and it's interesting to see that come together, because it was not really initially put together with that sort of thematic structure in mind, but I think this turned out really well. So thank you so much for your work, and also for yours.
Thank you, Jordan, for putting this together.
Absolutely.
Really
it's
great
a
to
pleasure.
be a part of it.
It's a pleasure most of the time. Thank you so much for watching this. Hope you enjoyed this look into how we have created stages, and again, this is available on this channel or on Spotify and everything else pretty soon, so stay tuned for that. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. It's been great.
See you next time.